The 4th of July, 1994, approximately 1,000 U.S. troops took part in a parade here on the Platz des 4. Juli, celebrating the anniversary of American independence. The parade also marked the end of 49 years of the U.S. military's occupation in this part of the city. The square obtained its name exactly 18 years earlier on the 200th anniversary of American independence. The sprawling campus and its imposing buildings housed the McNair Barracks of the U.S. Army's Berlin Brigade. But the buildings were not originally built for the U.S. military. Rather, they were built during World War II as the headquarters and factories of Telefunken, which at the time was producing military radio equipment. And the parade square? Well, it wasn't built by the Americans either. Rather, Telefunken's company's construction crews built the 400-meter-long and 70-meter-wide asphalted area for use as a road. It was the first section of a 4-ring road that was planned for Berlin in its role as the new world capital of the Germanic people, Germania, and would also be the last. It's a vestige that symbolizes the incompleteness of Germania itself. And in a sense, this abandoned roadway is a metaphor for the entire project. Vast in ambition, but left unfinished and ultimately reduced to a historical curiosity. And in this video, I'm going to show you some of the traces of Germania that still exist in Berlin. These include a few things not originally part of the plans, but were later incorporated. I will link to a map showing the locations that I visit in this video so that you can incorporate them when you visit the city. Or you can hire me, Steve, from Experience Berlin Tours to show you around. Now, on to our next stop. But first, some background. Germania was Adolf Hitler and his favorite architect Albert Speer's late 1930s plan to remake Berlin into a world capital. The scheme called for massive urban renewal, large swaths of central Berlin to be razed. Affected residents were to be relocated to newly created districts, with some Berliners, particularly Jews, expelled. It was centered on a 5-kilometer long and 120-meter wide north-south ceremonial axis called Prachtallee, which was to be lined with grand public buildings and colossal, and I mean colossal, monuments. This would be intersected by a central east-west axis with 4 ring roads, a portion of which I mentioned previously. Today, tens of thousands of tourists wander around the Reichstag building, waiting to visit the dome or just take pictures from Platz der Republik. Adjacent to the Reichstag is the Paul-Loeb-Haus, the central legislative office building for members of the Bundestag. And just to the west of it stands the Kanzleramt, where the Bundeskanzler and the governing coalition have their offices. The lone building to the north is the Swiss Embassy, which is here just by chance. The mostly empty land bordering the River Spree is called the Spreebogen, but it was once called the Alsen Quarter. The quarter consisted of grand townhouses and villas with a high concentration of foreign embassies. But these buildings were all cleared out, and the diplomatic buildings were relocated to the Tiergarten neighborhood, except for the Swiss Embassy. And I'll wager that less than 10% are aware of what was planned for this area. This land was set aside for the Volkshalle, the People's Hall, or the Great Hall, easily the largest piece of propaganda architecture that the Nazi Party could conjure up. And great, as in big, is an understatement. It was to be roughly 300 meters wide, with the top of the dome reaching about 300 meters in height. That's roughly 1,000 feet wide by 1,000 feet high. And it was designed to hold up to 180,000 spectators. Just for comparison, in this model, the Great Hall dwarfs the Reichstag building. And in this picture, you can see the Berlin City Palace inside of the Great Dome. Preliminary excavations for test drillings to determine if and how the swampy Spreebogen area could hold such a large building took place before ending due to the war. It was to be surrounded by several other buildings, including a new Führer Palace, a new Greater Reichstag building, as well as an office building for the Wehrmacht. And in this image, you can see the outlines of these proposed structures superimposed on a map of today's buildings, which are in red. Here is the Reichstag, the Loeb building, and the Kanzleramt. And the center courtyard where I'm standing now, today's Platz der Republik, would have been called Grosse Platz, or Great Square. Plans called for a great parade grounds. And if you were standing here in 1932, you would be looking up at the Siegesäule. The Siegesäule, or Victory Column, is a monument that was erected in 1873 to celebrate the Kingdom of Prussia's victories over Denmark, Austria, and France in 3 conflicts known as the Wars of German Unification. Many early photographs of the Reichstag building were taken from the column's observation deck. It stood at the northern end of Siegealle, or Victory Alley, a grand promenade commissioned by Kaiser Wilhelm II. It was lined with 32 marble monuments that depicted all of the margraves and electors of Brandenburg and the kings of Prussia between 1157 and 1888. For the Nazis, both were seen as representing the Second Reich, and they were building the Third Reich. And they were unfortunately in the way of the north-south axis. In fact, this axis was to replace the Siegealle, so they were both moved to the Tiergarten. The Siegesäule was disassembled and moved to Grosse, the center of Tiergarten, where it remains till today. And Siegealle was renamed Neue Siegealle and laid out to its south, along what's known today as Hofjägerallee. The ensemble was intended to serve as the new forum for the Second Reich. Many of the statues of the Neue Siegealle were damaged due to the war. Several of them were salvaged and can be found today at the Spandau Citadel. And now, looking at the image of the old Siegealle, you'll note that it intersects with Charlottenburger Chaussee, today known as Straße des 17. Juni, or June 17th Street. This intersection was to be the focal point of the two grand boulevards, and would stand directly in front of the entrance to Grosse Platz and the Volkshalle. Along the Tiergarten, Charlottenburger Chaussee's width was doubled to 53 meters. The new Prachtallee would follow the route of the old Siegealle, but its width would almost be tripled to 120 meters. The intersection had begun to take shape, so much so that curbs on the sidewalks were installed, and they still exist today. Also part of the planning was the removal of vehicle traffic on this intersection. And to accomplish this, several sections of vehicle tunnels were built underneath the road to allow vehicles to bypass the intersection. These tunnel sections, along with another tunnel built for a planned U-Bahn line, still exist below today. And just steps inside of Tiergarten is an access point that is only opened on special occasion for guided tours. Across the street, keen-eyed viewers will have noticed the Soviet War Memorial. You probably already have figured out why it's here at this important intersection. The Soviets were making a victory statement. And if you proceed west down Straße des 17. Juni, you will arrive at Grosse and the Siegesäule. To give the roundabout proportion, it was widened from 80 meters in diameter to about 200. The Nazis added an additional drum to the top of the column and enlarged the base to have it in balance with the road and roundabout. Access to the Siegesäule is obtained through tunnels, each with a neoclassical column pavilion as entrances, designed by Albert Speer himself. West beyond Siegesäule, you will find something else designed by Speer. You will notice an abrupt change in the street lamps starting at the Tiergarten S-Bahn station. 715 of these candelabra-style streetlights were built along this road, accounting for roughly 10% of all electrical streetlights in Berlin at the time. Also at this point is the Ernst Reuter House, which is the only building on the east-west axis in the original plans for Germania that was erected, and it's one of the few large-scale administrative buildings from these plans that exist today. It was originally built as the Berlin headquarters of the German Association of Municipalities, which it continues to house to this day. As in the case with administrative buildings of this era, it appears to me to be a version of Art Deco, just without the art or the deco. And it stands next to the Charlottenburger Tor, which were once the gates to an independent city and now district of Charlottenburg. The gate was Charlottenburg's counterpart to the Brandenburg Gate. The two sections were once much closer, but were spread apart to accommodate the widening of the road. And the ceremonial section of the east-west axis reaches its western end, a little more than 3 kilometers to the west, at Theodor-Heuss Platz. It's named after the Federal Republic of Germany's first president. It was created as a public square at the turn of the 20th century and given the name Reichskanzlerplatz. But there wasn't much here at the time. In 1933, it was renamed Adolf Hitler Platz, but Speer's plans called for yet another renaming. This Platz in Charlottenburg would be renamed Mussolini Platz after the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. In the center of the square, a 46-meter tall monument and statue titled Bereitschaft, or Readiness, was to be erected. It was to be surrounded by 2 colonnaded arcades. But as was the case with most of Germania's building plans, the war cut off money and essential materials. And in my opinion, it's hard to imagine that this type of monumental construction could be sustained, particularly at the pace that Hitler insisted on. Today, the square is home to several memorials, including 2 in particular. The first thing that catches one's eye is the Blue Obelisk, a 15-meter tall fountain made of stacked blue glass cubes. There are 7 cubes in total, each with etchings of the artist's own handwritten notes, dates, and keywords about the history of the square. And on the eastern end of the square is the Eternal Flame. It was installed here in 1955 and dedicated to the victims of flight and expulsion. Inscribed on its eastern side is Freiheit, Recht und Friede, freedom, justice, and peace. And you can get a sense of the scale of what the Nazis were aiming for with a view down the east-west axis from here. Now, one more building to point out before we leave this axis. Just beyond the square is a building that now houses the Bürgeramt, or the Citizens' Services for the district of Charlottenburg. It's actually two buildings, built in stages in 1938 and 1941, but the eastern side once housed the national offices of the Hitler Youth Organization. I'm sure that you are seeing a pattern with these buildings. Now we will leave the east-west axis and head to the north-south axis near Potsdamer Platz. Perhaps the most interesting oddity existing from Germania is the Schwerbelastungskörper, or heavy load-bearing body. It was built to test Berlin's sandy soil to see if it could hold another one of the city's planned megaliths. The structure consists of two concrete cylinders weighing a combined 12,000 metric tons. The lower cylinder has a diameter of 11 meters and reaches 18 meters underground. On top of that is the more visible concrete cylinder, which has a diameter of 21 meters and rises 15 meters above the ground. It was created as a test for just one of the 4 support pillars of a planned triumphal arch. The planned arch would have been 117 meters high and 170 meters wide, twice as tall and 4 times as wide as the one found in Paris. And it would be inscribed with the names of all German soldiers and sailors who died in World War I. Plans for the arch were put on hold due to the war, and it was instead used as an air raid shelter. After the war, it was determined that the structure had indeed sunk roughly 20 centimeters and was slightly off kilter. It was deemed too risky to the nearby residential areas to blow up, so it was left, eventually becoming the documentation center it is today. You can wander inside and see some rusted equipment and peek down below into the lower chamber. There are some signs explaining the structure as well as how French forced laborers were employed in its construction. You can climb up an adjacent tower for views of the structure from above, as well as nice 360-degree views of Berlin. Now, on to our next stop, and we don't have far to go. And just a kilometer away is one of Berlin's most fascinating attractions. Named after the Knights Templar, who once occupied this land, Templehof Airport today is a massive public park that is loved by Berliners. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, the then 10-year-old airport was already obsolete. Soon thereafter, architect Ernst Sagabiel was tasked with designing a new airport terminal. And although Albert Speer's plans for Germania were still years away from being developed, the characteristics of the new airport were precursors for the final plans. The airport was also to be integrated into the eventual north-south axis, and it was meant to be big. When it was finished, it was among the largest airports in the world. Its gates and terminals were designed in a 1.2 kilometer long quadrant curve. The roof doubled as grandstands that could hold up to 100,000 people as an audience for air shows and military parades. And much of this roof is of a cantilever design, which has meant that planes could taxi to the gates and passengers could exit with cover from inclement weather. The airport would be one of the main locations where planes taking part in the Berlin airlift would land and depart. And just outside the airport's northeast entrance is the Platz der Luftbrücke, or Airlift Square, where you will find the memorial to the effort. And although its construction progressed quite a bit, like most of the plans for Germania, the war prevented its completion. You can visit the airport's interior and roof on a guided tour, something I highly recommend. Now, moving on to our next location, and we will keep with the theme of aviation. And here is another of Sagabiel's designs. And this one actually predates the airport and the official plans for Germania. This was the home of the Reich Ministry of Aviation. It was built between 1935 and 1936. It takes up a whole city block, measuring 250 meters in length and covers an area of 112,000 meters. It was among the largest office buildings in the world when it was built. By 1936, the ministry's role included civil and military aviation regulation. Hermann Göring, as Air Minister, had his official office here. After the war, it would be used briefly by Soviet occupation forces. During the GDR days, it housed the House of Ministries, the main administrative center of the East German government. Today, the building is known as the Detlef Rohwedder's House, and it's home to the Ministry of Finance, the tax man. Quite fitting. Now, there are many other buildings that I could include in this video, but I will only quickly mention a few here. Some, like the Neue Reichskanzlei, which was located just one block to the north of the Air Ministry, have been completely destroyed. But perhaps the largest trace of Germania could be the simple plaque marking where it all ended for the person most responsible for the idea of Germania. A parking lot, which is also fitting. And there's Olympiastadion, or the Olympic Stadium, the centerpiece of the Olympic Village. Although the 1936 Olympics were a propaganda coup for the Nazis, I don't include the stadium as part of Germania's plans because the plans for the stadium predate the Nazi takeover of Germany. One aspect of the whole Germania redevelopment plans that I haven't really spoken about was the clearing of existing buildings and structures. This included railways, office buildings, and residential buildings, anything that got in the way of the north-south axis in particular. Upwards of 20,000 flats were planned to be cleared for the redevelopment program. New apartment construction could not keep up with the demand, and as a result, the units occupied or owned by Jews or other targeted groups were confiscated in order to help make up the difference. Something that would intensify as Germany entered into full-scale war and with bombing raids on the city slowly reducing housing stock. This, of course, is a topic that deserves its own video and is a bit outside the intended scope of this video. I'll put some links in the description that cover this, but let me know in the comments if you'd like to see it covered in a future video. And the plans of Germania also disturbed the dead. Who would not be allowed to rest in peace? 20 cemeteries were slated for closure, including this one, the Alte St. Matthäus-Kirchhof, or the Old St. Matthew's Churchyard Cemetery. All 4,507 graves in this cemetery were to be removed and reinterred to new cemeteries outside of the city center. But as you know by now, the war put an end to the reinterments. According to the official website for the city of Berlin, only the northern third of this cemetery was cleared. Fascism or no fascism, German bureaucracy meant that the process was slow. And despite the slow pace, roughly 15,000 graves here and in nearby cemeteries combined were reinterred. But I'm glad to report that most of the cemetery remains, including some prominent burials. And I recommend visiting this cemetery to pay respects to Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm of the Brothers Grimm. And as I researched and prepared for this video, I came to realize how massive and complex this building of Germania really was. And I hope that I was able to shed some light on the subject. Let me know in the comments if you have questions or to recommend future videos. And check out this video for Off the Beaten Path World War II sites in Berlin, or this video where I walk around Berlin showing you World War II battle scars. And I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!